Halito Chim Kukma. That's Choctaw language for how. Hello, how are you? My name is Dawa'Son Sekou goes behind, and I'm a bellboy. What is a bellboy? A bellboy is someone um, that identifies as male, either cisgendered or someone that has a penis, and that is privileged in the world of oppression, privileged under this dictatorship, under this this dominance-driven um, system, and is privileged under it because of their gender. And so, bellboy is the bell is derived from um, bell hooks, and um, using her works to identify patriarchy within the uh, within male identified or gender male identified individuals, and using her literature to challenge, to enlighten, and to change behavior, thought patterns, um, so on and so forth. So I'm going to be using this video. I'm going to be using video to read her books, starting with The Will to Change. I'll also be reading um, Teaching Community, Pedagogy of Hope, and I also will be reading Outlaw Culture. And I also will be reading Women in Society, written by Sekou. Um, the Sekou was the president of Guinea-Bissau in 1961, I believe, to 1965, until there was a struggle, and he was ran out. Um, and he wrote a book about women in society, particularly focusing on African culture. I also will be reading other books, especially I am indigenous and African, and so I will be merging those two cultures into my experience, because that's directly related to my bloodline, and and I'll be going from there. Um, so yeah, we're gonna be starting, and the reason that we're doing this um, is first for my own healing, my own um, uh, healing of my family, to affect my immediate scope, which is my everyday life. I'm a father of 4 girls, ranging, oldest is 16, youngest is 1, and so it's there's been some things that's happened in my life as a young boy, um, and there are some things that never were addressed or healed, and so now I'm doing that work now, because if I don't do it now, I know that the future will become more challenging and bleak, and I will be more separated from the relationship with my daughters. and also my partner, which is and they are she's female identified. So that's and then also what I would like to do as these segments continue. What I see foresight is being able to create a curriculum and take that curriculum into um, the prison industrial complex or the which has multiple levels, beginning at juvenile, or even we can even say foster home or orphanages, um, high schools, and then the institutions that create those prisons, and begin to open up dialogue, create organizations that challenge male dominance, male violence, and and eradicate it um, in, in 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 men's lives. And so it's to say bellboy is not to say that it's cut off from women being engaged in this work, but it's one thing that Malcolm used to say until we begin to work on ourselves, and he was addressing the uh, European journalist when the journalist asked, "What can we do?" And in the beginning, he was saying that we need to work on ourselves first before the women could to begin to do work with us or work for us, or things like that. And so we're in a heightened movement. It's a revolutionary state across the globe, I believe, and so some evolutionary measures have to be taken in order to find solidarity along the gender line. And I think Bell Hooks has the best analysis, um, given the fact that she's coming from a so a, hit, a historical line that was pivotal, a historical time that was pivotal, beginning her works, in the early 60s, 70s, 80s, um, when black and brown and indigenous people were beginning to find their voice and their revolutionary um, strength and their evolutionary um, consciousness. And so I believe that she really hit a lot of things on the head, and we could learn from that. I'm not erasing any other feminist thinkers, radical feminist thinkers. I just think that Bell Hooks has the best, or the most benevolent perspective, um, from a place of healing and a place from inclusion, and a place of work, of creativity, instead of bashing and disconnecting. So what I'm going to be doing is reading a chapter a week, and I'll be posting that chapter up along with a discussion, things from my perspective that stepped out, or that stood out in the chapter, and my having and keeping that post within, um, I would say 30 minutes, 45 minutes to an hour, um, and then going from there. And I will see where it goes where it goes from there. So first, so that's the who, that's the what, the why, uh, pretty much the how, and the where we're going. Hopefully, we evolve from here. So, beginning first book, The Will to Change, and we're choosing this book because of the title, and also one of the first books to where it's really honest and where Bell Hooks wants to go, and what she sees um, in men, masculinity and love. And so we'll be reading the preface first, and then we'll be highlighting some things within the preface, and then discussing them, and doing a sort of a analysis of those readings, and then that will be all. And again, I'm reading this because I know even if this blog is open, or there are many people in our culture that that have difficulty reading, and so there it's a way for others to follow along. It's a lot of ways for folks to just engage with someone else through a authoritative, an authoritative way, because we're authoritative people, native, we're authoritative people, and Africans are authoritative people, um, and so this is my way of culturally um, lining up with those traditions, and sharing my voice by reading these words into space, and reading these words um, into this dialogue. Preface: The Will to Change, um, Men, Masculinity, and Love by Bell Hooks. When Phyllis Chesler's book about man was first published more than 10 years ago, I was excited. At last, I thought then, a feminist thinker would explain this mystery man. Back then, I had never share with anyone the feelings I had about men. I had not even been able to confess that not only did I not understand men, I feared them. Chesler, with her usual take no prisoners daring, was certain would not simply I was certain I was certain would not simply name this fear, explain it. She would do much more. She would make men real to me. She would become Men will become people I could talk to, work with, love. Her book was disappointing, filled with quotes from numerous sources, newspaper clippings of male violence. It offered bits and pieces of information. There were little to no explanation, no interpretation. From that time on, I began to think that women were afraid to speak openly about men, afraid to explore deeply our connections to them, what we have witnessed as daughters, sisters, grandmothers, mothers, aunts, lovers, occasional sex objects, and afraid even to acknowledge our ignorance, how much we really do not know about men. All that we do not know intensifies our sense of fear and threat, and certainly to know men only in relation to male violence, to violence inflicted upon women and children, is partial, inadequate knowing. Nowadays, I'm amazed that women who advocate feminist politics have had so little to say about men and masculinity. Within the early writings of radical feminism, anger, rage, and even hatred of men was voiced. Yet there was no meaningful attempt to offer ways to resolve these feelings, to imagine a culture of reconciliation where women and men might meet and find common ground. Militant feminism gave women permission to unleash their rage and hatred at men, but it did not allow us to talk about what it meant to love men in patriarchal culture, to know how we could express that love without fear of exploitation and oppression. Before her death, Barbara Demings was among those rare outspoken feminist thinkers who wanted to create a space for women to talk openly about their feelings about men, articulating her concern and the wellspring of female fury at men was making it impossible for women to express any other feelings then their sense that men are hopeless. Excuse me. Okay. Where were we? Okay. The men are hopeless. She stated, quote, "It scares me that more and more women are coming to feel this way, to feel that men as an entire gender are hopeless, deeming, unquote, deeming did not feel that men were incapable of change, of moving away from male domination, but she did feel that it was necessary for women to speak the truth about how we think about men. Quote, I believe that the only way we can get there, we have to go is by never refusing to face the truth of our feelings as they rise up in us, even when we wish it was not the truth. So we have to admit to the truth that we sometimes wish our fathers, sons, brothers, lovers were not there. But this truth exists alongside another truth, the truth that this wish causes and is us anguish. While some women active in the feminist movement felt anguished about our collective inability to convert masses of men to feminist thinking, many women simply felt that feminism gave them permission to be indifferent to men, to turn away from male needs. When contemporary feminism was at its most intense, many women insisted that they were weary of giving energy to men, that they wanted to place women at the center of all feminist discussion. Feminist thinkers like myself who wanted to include men in the discussion were usually labeled male identified and dismissed. We were sleeping with the enemy. We were the feminists who could not be trusted because we cared about the fates of men. We were the feminists who did not believe in female superiority any more than we believed in male superiority. As the feminist movement progressed, the the fact became evident that sexism and sexist exploitation and oppression could not change unless men were also deeply engaged in feminist resistance. Yet most women were still expressing no genuine interest in highlighting discussions of maleness and acknowledging that there needed to be more feminist focus on men did not lead to the production of a body of writing by women about men. The lack of such writing intensifies my sense that women cannot fully talk about men because we have been so well socialized in patriarchal culture to be silent on the subject of men. But more than silence, we have been socialized to be the keepers of grave and serious secrets, especially those who could reveal the everyday strategies of male domination, how male power is enacted and maintained in our private lives. Indeed, even the radical feminist labeling of all men as oppressive and all women as victims was a way to deflect attention away from the reality of men and our ignorance about them. To simply label them as oppressors and dismiss them meant we never had to give voice to the gaps in our understanding or to talk about maleness in complex ways. We did not have to talk about the ways our fear of men distorted our perspectives and blocked our understanding. Hating men was just another way to not take men and masculinity seriously. It was simply easier for feminist women to talk about challenging and changing patriarchy than it was for us to talk about men. What we knew and did not know about the ways we wanted men to change. Better to just express our desire to have men disappear, to see them dead and gone. Eloquently, Barbara Deming expresses this longing when she writes about her father's death. Quote, years ago, it was on a weekend in the country, and we've been working outside with a pick and shovel. And he'd been working outside with a pick and shovel making a new garden plot. He'd had a heart attack and fallen there in loose dirt. We called the rescue squad, and they were trying to bring him back to life, but couldn't. I was half lying on the ground next to him, with my arms around his body. I realized that this was the first time in my life that I had felt able to really touch my father's body. I was holding it hard. I was holding hard to it, with my love and with my grief. And my grief was partly that my father, who I loved, was dying, but it was also that I knew already that his death would allow me to feel freer. I was mourning that this had to be so. It's a grief that is hard for me to speak of, that the only time I would feel freer to touch him without feeling threatened by this power over me was when he lay dead. It's unbearable to me. And I think there can hardly be women who hasn't felt a comparable grief. So it's an oversimplification to speak the truth when we sometimes wish men dead, unless we also speak the truth, which is perhaps even harder to face as we try to find out our powers to be our own women, to be our own women. The truth is that this wish is unbearable to us. It rends us, unquote. As a young woman in my 20s, I had not yet found her own powers. I often wished the men in my life would die. My longing for my father's death began in childhood. It was the way I responded to his rage, his violence. I used to dream him gone, dead and gone. Death was a way out of the fear evoked by the proclamation, quote, wait until your father comes home, unquote. The threat of punishment was so intense, his power over us so real. Excuse me. The threat of punishment was so intense, his power over us was so real. Lying in my girlhood bed, waiting to hear the hard anger in his voice, the invasive sound of his commands, I used to think, if only he would die, we could live. Later, as a grown woman waiting for a man in her life to come home, the man who was more often than not a caring partner, but who sometimes erupted into violent fits of rage, I used to think maybe he would have an accident and die. Maybe he would not come home, and I will be free and able to live. Women and children all over the world want men to die so they can live. This is the most painful truth of male domination, that men wield patriarchal power in daily life in ways that are awesomely life-threatening, that women and children cower in fear and various states of powerlessness, believing that the only way out of their suffering, their only hope is for men to die, for the patriarchal father not to come home. Women and female and male children dominated by men have wanted them dead because they believe that these men are not willing to change. They believe that men who are not dominators would not protect them. They believe that men are hopeless. When I left home and went away to college, if I called home, my father answered, I hung up. I had nothing to say to him. I had no words to communicate to the dad who did not listen, who did not seem to care, who did not speak words of tenderness or love. I had no need for the patriarchal dad. Feminism had taught me that I could forget about him, turn away from him. And turning away from my dad, I turned away from a part of myself. It is a fiction of false feminism that we women can find our power in the world without men, in a world where we deny our connections to men. We claim our power fully only when we can speak the truth. Only when we can speak the truth. We claim our power fully only when we can speak the truth that we need men in our lives, that men are in our lives whether we want them to be or not, that we need men to challenge patriarchy, that we need men to change. While feminist thinking enabled us men to reach beyond the boundaries set by patriarchy, it was the search for wholeness, for self-recovery, that led me back to my dad. My reconciliation with my father began with my reconciliation that I wanted to be that I wanted and needed his love, and that if I could not have his love, then at least I needed to heal the wound in my heart his violence had created. I needed to talk with him, tell him my truth, to hold him close and let him know he mattered. Nowadays, when I call home, I revel in the sound of my dad's voice, his southern speech familiar and broken in all the right places. I want to hear his voice forever. I do not want him to die. This dad whom I can hold in my arm, who receives my love and loves me back. Understanding him, I understand myself better. To claim my power as a woman, I have to claim him. We belong together. The will to change men, masculinity, and love is about our need to live in a world where women and men can belong together. Looking at the reasons patriarchy had maintained its power over men and their lives, I urge us to reclaim feminism for men, showing why feminist thinking and practice are the only way we can truly address the crisis of masculinity today. In these chapters, I repeat many points so that each chapter alone will convey the most significant ideas of the whole. Men cannot change if there is no blueprints for change. Men cannot love if they are not taught the art of loving. It is not true that men are unwilling to change. It is true that many men are afraid to change. It is true that masses of men have not even begun to look at the ways that patriarchy keeps them from knowing themselves, from being in touch with their feelings, from loving. To know love, men must be able to let go the will to dominate. They must be able to choose life over death. They must be willing to change. So, that was the preface titled About Men. And what I can say is, when I first read this, I was a complete shock because my own my own growing up, my own growing up, it was a lot of the pain and a lot of the abuse had come from my mother. But I also believe that had also came from men and the men in her life at the time that supported that abuse and that encouraged it and in a sense demanding it. So I remember writing a letter and putting it into a box that I kept, and it had no lock on it. I knew my mom would check it because she would always clean our room. And I put in the letter that I hate you, and I wish that she was gone, and I wish that I wasn't living there anymore. And 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 that sense of domination, I the sense of domination is within us all. What I know intensely that it is placed upon women, especially women of African um, women and indigenous women um, across the world, across the globe. And I mean, there's a lot of gaps there that I'm not covering, and please forgive me for that. I'm learning, but I know that the the feminist movement that was created by mostly white women, um, there's still some issues of racism. So I don't include that into my analysis as much. I include my analysis because of the women that were directly affected, directly connected in my life, were are still African women of descent, or that identify as such, and indigenous, native, and Latina women. And so those are the ones that have residency within my own space. And so that's where I'm coming from, and those are the women that I'm finding affinity with, and places to cure with and be with. So it was a huge shock to hear someone say that, because that's never been said about wanting your father to die and not be around you anymore because of that intense, um, oh, she says, awesomely um, dominance, and that intensified hatred just to be there all the time and wanting that to be eliminated. And so that was really shocking for me. Another part here is when she says, and I think it's important for us to say this because dominance uh, is a history. There's a history of dominance throughout the course of history. There's dominance. Dominance is around us all the time, and it's taught to us, and it mostly comes from, I believe, imperialism. I believe it comes from cultural cultural ethnocentrism. I believe it comes from um, capitalism and exploitation. Uh, and Women in Society, um, that was written by Sekou, talks about that quite a bit. How the introduction of a patriarchy into the monarchy, the matriarchy, um, off balanced, or off kiltered um, cultures, and so that's what we have today, is that off kiltered relationship between the masculine and the feminine, and that's because of the dominant culture, and that's because of patriarchy, and that's because of this capitalist driven, exploitive way of engaging with the planet, and engaging with communities, engaging with ourselves, engaging with um, it's engaging with space. Um, very male-dominated, penetrating, linear perspective. Not saying that linear is wrong. I'm saying it's over balance. It's over practice, and so that's why it's so dominant, because it's only one way of thinking. And so when she says, um, on the preface of, on page, I guess that would be page 12, X3, paragraph 1, when she says, we are the feminists who did not believe that female superiority any more, who did not believe in female superiority any more than we believe in male superiority. And right in there, I find affinity and solidarity there, because of her stance against the hierarchy, um, frame of governance, and hierarchy frame of authority. And since I was raised in a home that was dominated mostly the by a woman, that rings to that rings true to me, because it was a female superiority that that was abusive. That was overly abusive, even more abusive than my father was. My father was, well, physically, but the more emotionally abusive, um, than my father was, and so that most of my experience with abuse, and with neglect, and with shame, with fear, with self doubt, with a lot of emotional sickness, stemmed from the relationship with a, a woman in power. And so, a man in power, my reflection was not this necessarily was better. That's not, by far, it wasn't better. But all I can say is that the physical and the emotional um, manipulation and oppression was, I remember that more, and I can pinpoint that more coming from my mother, than coming from my father. My father was an education. So my father was more of a teacher, a leader, and so his education was off kilter. How he would treat women, the sexual exploitation of women, the cheating, the disrespect, like the manipulation, the sense of what the word I'm looking for is the sense of ownership. And so watching that, believing that that was the way that men were supposed to be, was a miseducation. And so, and my mother was to see what women was going, what single mothers, or I would say single mothers, even though she was married at the time, she was by herself, and just, you can tell that she was struggling on her own, and her only way to deal with the kids was to be violent to them. And so I'm not completely blaming her. I'm blaming still patriarchy as the key to her anger, and the key to her violence upon me is because it was her response to patriarchy. It was her response to having to live in a male dominated society, and the only way to do that is to instill violence on those that are in her care. So that's it for today. I'm going to try to keep these readings at least and explanations between 30 and an hour. It's we're about 40 minutes into it, and so I wanted to just to talk a few things about um, what we aim to do with this, um, and we'll go into it. We'll begin to break down more and have more to say. The preface, it seems, is what it is an introduction into what we're about to go into, and I'm really appreciating that it's opening the door and saying that we want to have relationships with men. That there are some circles that do not want that, and I understand why. We understand why, because of the dominance, because of the violence, um, and because of the the rape culture, and because of the things that we have done to the women in our lives, um, and when I say the women in our lives, I'm talking about the the others, the spectrum, the other spectrum that we so dearly need, and whoever is representing that perspective, or whoever is representing that spectrum, I'm including in that spectrum. Um, so if you're male identified, if you're women identified, if you're cis identified, if you are queer identified, if you're trying to balance in that perspective, you're standing up against patriarchy, you're standing up against male violence, and I'm here with you standing up against that. But I know that we have to do it from a loving place and include a place of inclusion, and not have everyone just shut down. Um, I don't want to shut down. I want to keep going, and so this is the way that I can keep going. And and so I'm appreciating the preface and the introduction, and into her lives, and that had to take that must took a lot for Bell Hooks to face her father, and now she's sharing that and saying that she can, if she can face that that spectrum, and that perspective, then we can too. And so I'm really excited about that. And then one of the most amazing quotes at the end of that preface was that man cannot change if there are no blueprints for change. Man cannot love if they're not taught the art of loving. Love is vital to maleness, to the spiritual, emotional wholeness men seek. And so that's true. I don't think that we should. Um, there's some parts of society, or some parts of the systematic system of dominance, that over sexualizes men, that over sexualizes women, that causes us to be in an unkiltered way of thinking, and in some cases are telling us to remove maleness from our perspective, and remove masculinity and from our perspective, and begin to take on another form, um, and to erase that perspective. Now we have to identify what maleness is, and what masculinity is, and what it is not. And I believe that it is a healthy perspective, and I'm getting there. I'm not there. We're getting there, and to understand that masculinity and maleness is a healthy perspective, and we have to just stay kiltered on what that means. Just like to be to have to be a woman, and to have a feminine perspective, a femme perspective, that has to be balanced. It has to be kiltered. And so it can't just be that all the time. It has to be balanced. And so we have to, not all that, that's not what I mean to say. I mean to say that it can't be superior, as when men cannot be superior. We have to meet each other and find community with each other, and then we can grow, and our children can find balance in our by seeing those relationships enacted directly um, and indirectly in their lives. Um, so that's Bellboy 1, and we'll keep going. The next chapter will be chapter 1, Wanted, Men Who Love. And we'll be starting that, we'll be reading that, and then we'll be discussing and highlighting some points. And so I will go through and read it first, and then I'll read it again, and then I'll just highlight some things that were said, that definitely that pinned, pointed my psyche and pinpointed my heart, pinpointed my understanding and my current reality. And yeah, so Aishka is a word thank you in the Lummi language, which is my family, my connection to indigenous culture today. And so Aishka, thank you, OCM, and I'll be talking to you soon. Ding, 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 ding. Bellboy signing off.